Okay, this is part 1 of your Chapter 9 lecture. This chapter will be broken up into 2 different parts simply because it is the largest chapter in the book, as well as the fact that this is the area that employs the largest number of beginning social workers, so I thought it would be logical to give this chapter a little bit more detail and time. Once again, family definitions from social workers are typically a little bit more flexible than they will be for some other groups. Family is a primary group. You typically know everyone in your family by name, things like that. Interaction on a regular basis, if not a daily basis, daily cooperation in order to meet mutual goals. Members of a family often and should have a mutual commitment and responsibility to each other. Now, there are several different types of families. You can have a nuclear family with mom, dad, and children, 2 generations in a single household. Single-parent families have become about 4 times more common than they were 50 years ago in the United States, so they are a very common one. Intergenerational families, this is anything that we think of that has more than 3 generations within the same house, or it can only have 2 generations if you skip a generation in between, such as grandparents taking care of their grandchildren without the parents being present. Okay. Another very common type of family is a blended family, which is a step family. Basically, these people were members of a different family through divorce and remarriage, or widowhood and remarriage. They have formed a new family unit. Now, each of these presents different challenges as far as working with them, but all of them can be very successful family structures. Okay. There's a number of reasons when you see social workers getting involved with a child or with a child and family network. Okay. One of them is just parental role unoccupied. And really, it doesn't matter why it's unoccupied. It just matters that it is unoccupied. That could be due to a family member or a parent is missing because they have died, because they have abandoned their family, because they are incarcerated. Any number of things can cause this, but just somebody is not in that parental role. Okay? Parental incapacity is whenever the parent does not have the capacity to fulfill what society thinks a parent should be able to do. Okay? Maybe they've got a mental illness. Let's say that a father has a debilitating depression, so he simply can't get out of bed in the morning. That's parental incapacity. If you can't get out of bed, it's going to be very difficult to follow a 3-year-old around and make sure that they're not getting into mischief or dangerous situations, hurting themselves. Okay? Rejection is whenever one parent just rejects the social norms of being a parent and is not performing that function. You can see this fairly frequently with very young parents, teen parents many times. They want to continue being a child, and in some ways society says they should be a child. But sometimes they will reject that role. Whenever I say it's complicated, we think about if a high school senior has a child, should she still go to school? Most people would say yes. Well, what about all the other social things that are involved with school? Should she be going to school dances or the school prom or Friday night football games or whatever the case might be? Get into a little bit more difference of opinion about where that should be. Okay, what should her role, and the obviously absent male in this scenario seems to have rejected his role as well. Pro-role conflict is parent versus parent. Who's supposed to bathe the child? Mom says, I don't want to do it. I've done it the last 15 times. Dad says, well, that's your job. That's intra-role. Okay, and we can all argue about whose job it should be or anything like that. But when one of them, the parent, is forcing those parental duties on another one, that is intra-role conflict. Inter-role is both parents are together, but they cannot fulfill all of society's needs or all of society's demands upon parents. Okay? What are the people responsible for as a parent? Sometimes you have very conflicting roles. Okay? As a parent, society says, I should be there whenever my child has a music recital to support them, or my child has a football game to support them, or my child has a violin recital to support them. Society also says I should hold a job, and if I have to teach at the same time as their third grade choir performance is going on, I obviously cannot be at both things. Okay, so that is inter-role conflict, where you have multiple roles within the same status that are conflicting with each other. Child incapacity or disability. Sometimes children need more than parents can provide. Okay, it just happens. The special needs child has special needs. Sometimes parents may not have special skills to deal with those needs. Sometimes you can have just a deficiency in community resources. If you think about for young parents, many times you will see people under the age of 25 work schedules and work at jobs that require them to work until 8, 9, 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, if they're in the service industry or something like that. Well, think about if you have a child and the best job you can find is being a waiter at a high-end restaurant, but 4 times a week you have to work until midnight. There is only one daycare in town in Lubbock, Texas, that will keep children past 6 p.m. One. And they are full. Okay? That is a deficiency in community resources. Or even if you have somebody to take care of your child and you need to get to and from work in order to support them, but you don't have a car. In Lubbock, the buses stop running at, I believe it's 7 p.m. I know they don't run very long after that, if they do run after that at all. Well, how are you supposed to get to and from work if the community is not providing you a way to do that? We can all say, well, get a car, but it's hard to work a job and earn money in order to buy a car if you can't get to and from the job. So these would just be deficiencies in community resources. Certainly the goals of the welfare of children are to meet the children's unmet emotional, behavioral, and health needs, provide adequate resources for the child to be healthy. That includes mental health, okay? Give families the resources they need to build upon their strengths and improve their interpersonal skills. Help people be better parents, okay? We need to safeguard children from neglect and abuse, and, if necessary, change the living conditions of the family, okay? But our first priority should be to build up the family so that the family can be the type of parents they want to be, and they can increase those strengths. We don't have enough foster parents to take every child away from every family, so it logically makes sense that we need to improve the families that they are already in. Now, we can do this in a number of different ways. We have supportive and substitutive services. A supportive service supports the family that is already there. A substitutive service steps in and substitutes for the family while typically removing the child from the family for a period of time. Now, that could be a few weeks up to permanently. Child maltreatment is sort of the catch-all term for all types of physical, sexual, psychological abuse. Physical abuse involves injury as a result of a parent or caretaker action, or it can also be a result of inaction or negligence. Sexual abuse, any activity where sexual activity with a child where consent is not or cannot be given. You realize children cannot give consent for sex up until age 15, I believe, in Texas. So if 2 children are having sex, 2 12-year-olds are having sex, that is probably that is still obviously a problem. They may not have been preying on each other, but they were not being monitored. Child neglect is when a failure of a child's parent who has the resources, and that in parentheses is a very important part, to provide the children with minimally adequate health care, nutrition, education, supervision, affection, things like that. Cannot call it neglect if a parent does not feed the child if they cannot feed themselves. If they didn't have the money to feed themselves, that is not child neglect. If they did have the money and chose to not take their child to the doctor or educate their child in an appropriate way, that is neglect. This can get a little bit touchy when we introduce the idea of religious freedom in the United States and things like that, but that is a discussion that is bigger than I can handle in such a brief Psychological and emotional neglect, either passive or passive-aggressive inattention to a child's emotional needs, not meeting them where they are in order to support the child in their development. So examples of psychological abuse could be belittling children, rejecting them, undermining their self-esteem, things like that, extreme embarrassment. Sometimes parents can embarrass children to teach them a lesson. That can be useful. But if you are embarrassing the child without any educational reason, and even embarrassing them for educational reason is a little iffy, that can be considered psychological. Containing children in an extremely small space, such as a dog crate or something like that. Cinderella syndrome is whenever we treat groups of children and one of them is always the problem, such as the fairy tale Cinderella. Or 3 kids get to go to vacation at Disneyland and we leave the 5-year-old at home because that's the problem child or something like that. Extreme verbal cruelty, just once again, it's psychological to have people yelling at you and swearing at you and things like that. Or forcing a child into delinquent behavior such as prostitution, drug use, different things like that. Other examples of psychological abuse: intimidating children, refusing to seek psychological treatment, and you see this actually quite a bit, or dealing with things like ADHD or things like that, restricting their social and emotional development, or just not loving and emotionally supporting the child. Now, rates of maltreatment, we know that these are underreported because a lot of children don't seek help, and sometimes this just slips through the crack. The most common type of maltreatment is neglect. By far, it is the most common type. Physical abuse is a little over 16%. Sexual abuse is under 10%. Many times people are surprised that sexual abuse is under 10% because that's the ones you always hear about. If you think about it this way, 99% of all airplanes take off and land safely without incident, but the one that crashes, that's the one we hear about. Same thing sort of happens with sexual abuse. That's the one we hear about. 7.1% is emotional abuse, and then 2% medical neglect. This will end part 1 of chapter 9.